Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
This is a historic conviction.
Former House Speaker Michael Madigan joins the long list of local politicians convicted on corruption charges. We have reaction to today's bombshell day in court. What proposed federal funding cuts could mean for early childhood education programs in Illinois.
I will miss the advice, but I will always hear her voice in my heart and in my head.
And remembering a pioneer of early education. First off tonight, the verdict is in. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan has been convicted of federal corruption charges. The jury reached a verdict on the 11th day of deliberations while deadlocking on other charges. Madigan, at one time, was the state's most powerful politician. Now he joins a long list of politicians locally who have been convicted of corruption. Reporters Matt Masterson and Amanda Vinicky join us now with more. Matt, you've been watching this since it began. The jury came to a unanimous decision on 17 counts, but not on the remaining 12. What did they convict him of and what was left unsettled?
So he was convicted on 10 charges: bribery, conspiracy, and wire fraud, 10 counts of those. He was acquitted on 7 others, and the jury failed to reach a verdict on 6 others related to him. Prosecutors had outlined 5 separate corruption schemes that Madigan was alleged to have orchestrated. He was only convicted on charges related to 2 of those, though, including the largest one of them with the ComEd bribery scheme. But there was no guilty verdict, or he was not acquitted on 3 of the other schemes, including the top count of racketeering conspiracy, a RICO charge, which alleged that his political operation was essentially this criminal enterprise. But perhaps the most surprising was this Union West scheme, one of which Danny Solis, the former Chicago alderman acting as an undercover mole, recorded a conversation with Madigan, specifically referring to a quid pro quo arrangement with a property developer. Madigan said, yeah, okay. He said that he was essentially agreeing to this. Prosecutors said this showed that his mindset was that he understood and wanted to enter into this illegal arrangement, but Madigan himself testified that he was simply trying to move this conversation along. He was just saying, yeah, okay, such as that. And the jury obviously agreed with what he had to say on this because they acquitted him on all charges related to this, which was a bit of a surprise. This was some of the prosecutors' most hard evidence that they had of him on this, and that it didn't lead to a conviction.
Can we expect a retrial on some of those counts that the jury couldn't reach a decision on?
It's not yet clear. Acting U.S. Attorney Morris Preschool didn't rule it out. He said that they want to explore all their options, and moving forward on this, they very well could, but it's not clear yet if they will. But it could be another trial on this going forward at some point.
Amanda, Madigan was the longest serving leader of any state or federal legislative body. You covered him a lot as well. Historically, what does this conviction mean?
Well, this is huge. It certainly did not get the attention nationally that, say, former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich or even George Ryan before him did. He wasn't a governor. He's not a big national name, but he was such a powerhouse in Illinois politics that this is, I think, massive locally. Thinking again of Blagojevich, I mean, he didn't last 2 terms. He wasn't a particularly strong governor, didn't have a lot of tight allegiances even then, whereas Madigan still does, even through all of this. He has allies, he has loyalists. He was in power still for 6 months after the ComEd deferred prosecution agreement became public, and it sort of became clear that he was tied into it. So I think that this really is sort of earth-shattering when it comes to Illinois politics, particularly because the long-running notion had been that he was too smart for this, that he played chess, that he wrote the rules so that he could navigate around them and wouldn't have to do anything illegally.
Madigan's co-defendant, longtime confidant Michael McLean, also on trial with him. What do we know of his charges?
Yeah, his soldier and surrogate, and before this trial, his very close friend. He said his head was spinning when the jury did not return a verdict on any of the 6 charges that he was facing. Prosecutors had painted him as basically carrying out Madigan's dirty work so that Madigan didn't have to get his fingerprints on any of these bribery schemes. But as Patrick Cotter, his defense attorney, said afterwards, that McClain was leaving court as he entered it, which was an innocent man. He wasn't convicted on anything today, but it is important to note that he was previously convicted in the ComEd 4 bribery case. So on the other side of this, of conspiring to bribe Madigan on those charges, he has already been convicted in that separate case.
So not quite innocent.
Right.
No, yeah. So Amanda, in response to Madigan's verdict, Illinois House Republicans, they held an ethics reform meeting today. What did we hear from them?
So really, this was actually just a press conference, and they're talking about what changes they want to be made. They said that they've been frustrated by the slow reaction that Democrats have had, despite, as I described this, as really sort of shattering underneath the Capitol dome. They said that there hasn't been enough done to try to root something out, to root out this sense of corruption, entitlement, the lifting up of legislative leaders that made them so all-powerful. There was some legislation that was enacted previously, but even reform groups, you're talking about Change Illinois, Common Cause, Reform for Illinois, they say that those were relatively toothless. And so the only reaction that they say the General Assembly has taken is not enough. And that's something that Republicans really hold strong to. And they also point out, Democrats are still in power. This did not do anything to really punish Democrats at the ballot box.
So Deputy Illinois House Leader Ryan Spain had a bit to say about changing the way Illinois state government currently operates. Here he is.
So today it's clear with this verdict, we have to change the way we do business in the state of Illinois. We have to throw out the Mike Madigan playbook and do away with this culture of corruption that continues to persist in our state house.
Amanda, what does throwing out the Michael Madigan playbook look like?
So this is sort of what I was getting at. It is things such as empowering the legislative inspector general, something that they say was never done, and therefore you couldn't file an ethics complaint against Madigan or anybody else that was perceived to have been doing something unethical or wrong within the General Assembly, and that's part of the toothless notion. That legislators are able to, there is some limit now, but not really. There's like a crack in the revolving door, but still they say that there needs to be done more to close it. They also point to the current Illinois House Speaker, who they say was, handpicked by Madigan. That might not be exactly the word that I would use, but it is certainly true that Welch was close with Madigan. And they say that they're still using, by and large, the same House rules, the very same House rules that as part of this case, we heard Madigan was able to use his power to hold up legislation. The Speaker and, frankly, over in the Senate, the President, institutionally can still do so.
Matt, you mentioned the ComEd case, but the jury failed to reach a verdict on the AT&T case. What's the issue there?
Same general scheme, that he was trading legislative action for a job for his legislative ally, Eddie Acevedo. The feds have run into trouble with this already. They had already tried former AT&T Illinois President Paul Atskiatsa for soliciting or conspiring to bribe Madigan. That led to no verdict. This now, also today, no verdict against Madigan and McClain. One of the top witnesses that the prosecutors had planned to call, a former AT&T executive, he, in the Atskiatsa trial, said that he wasn't aware of any sort of arrangement between this legislative action and this contract for Acevedo. He was actually called by Madigan's defense in this trial and said the same thing, and that helped lead to a no verdict for the pair of them, Madigan and McClain, today.
Okay, a busy courthouse and a busy bunch of reporters who are covering this. Matt Masterson, Amanda Vinicky, thank you. And you can read the full story on our website, including lots of reaction coming in. That is all at WTTW.com/news.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
And now to some more of today's top stories. An afternoon lull in snowfall for the Chicago area is expected to pick back up this evening. The National Weather Service says accumulating snow is expected to redevelop between 6 and 10 o'clock tonight. Forecasts show an additional 1 to 2 inches. So if you're on your drive home, be prepared to slow down. Relatives of Sonya Massey are speaking out today after the Sangamon County Board approves a $10 million settlement to her family after her death last summer. Massey is believed to have been in a mental health crisis last July when she called 911 about a potential prowler outside her home. but she was shot and killed by responding sheriff's deputy Sean Grayson in her kitchen. Prior to Sangamon County, Grayson is believed to have worked at 6 other law enforcement agencies in 4 years and had personal DUI convictions. Since Massey's death, Springfield lawmakers have introduced legislation to strengthen background checks as well as work and personal history sharing between departments. Massey's father today says he thanks Springfield for its work on this.
I can't say the same for Sangamon County because they were responsible for this occurring. And Logan County, and Kincaid, and the other smaller departments that this guy was at when they should have taken his certification to be a law enforcement officer in Illinois. And again, I say he should have never been hired.
Today would have been Massey's 37th birthday. A video of City Hall's suddenly well-known gift room is raising more questions than answers, according to the city watchdog. That's after Mayor Brandon Johnson's office released this short video showing the room that holds the gifts the mayor's team accepts on behalf of the city. Gifts include coffee mugs, shoes, baseball caps, t-shirts, awards, books, as well as designer handbags and cufflinks. Johnson recently came under fire by the city inspector general after an audit revealed his office accepted pricey items on behalf of the city without properly reporting them as required. Neither the IG or members of news media, including WTTW News, have been allowed to inspect the room, as the IG says is required by city ordinance. President Donald Trump says he wants to do away with the Department of Education immediately. Here's a little of what he said just this afternoon.
Oh, I'd like it to be closed immediately. Look, the Department of Education's a big con job. We're ranked, so they rank the top 40 countries in the world. We're ranked number 40th. But we're ranked number 1 in one department, costs per pupil.
Meanwhile, funding for programs such as Head Start, which provides wraparound services for low-income families and children, are also under threat. Joining us now to look at the potential impact of cuts to early childhood education in Illinois are Michaela Collins, a former Head Start parent and now member of the board of directors at the Illinois Head Start Association, and Shauna Ejay, Senior Vice President for Programs at Illinois Action for Children. Thanks to you both for joining us. So in recent years, we know that early childhood education, it's been through some bumps. Shauna, I want to start with you, please. How would you describe the state of early education and childcare in Illinois right now?
You know, right now, I think from a state perspective, we have a lot of support. Governor Pritzker has started his Smart Start program, and we're doing wonderful things for children and families statewide. The threat to us, though, is on the federal level. The federal government helps support our Child Care Assistance Program, which really supports low-income families who need access to quality childcare, with covering that very, very huge expense for their families. In addition, Head Start programs throughout the country are really struggling with having access to funding that's already been appropriated to them, that's already been granted to them on an ongoing basis. And so we did have a scare a week or two ago where we couldn't access the payment entry system at all. And then right now it seems every day or every other day it is being shut down for maintenance. And we have a few programs in our state that have been unable to access the funding they need to pay their staff.
What have been some of the challenges, or what are some of the challenges, Michaela, for families in getting access to early childhood education?
So Head Start offers a wide range of programs and services for children and their families. When we enroll in Head Start, we're enrolling not only the child, but the families as well. So children are lacking on mental health services, nutrition services, social services, anything that offers support for children and families.
Shauna, same question to you. What do some families what are the barriers? What do they have to go through in making sure that they can afford and find early learning opportunities for their kids?
Well, we already know that in the state of Illinois, we have deserts. We have some locations within our state where there actually are no services. And so the state has worked really hard to try to infuse funding into some of those locations so that families can have access. We know that without access, families can't work, they can't pursue training, they can't go to school, et cetera. And so our goal is accessible quality childcare for all statewide. The situation with losing Head Start, which is a really huge component of some of the services that are offered to families in the state of Illinois, would be devastating. It would leave such a gap in services, particularly for low-income families that need that additional support of that two-generational program.
And Shauna, you mentioned the governor's Smart Start program. Last year, Governor Pritzker also created the state's first ever Department of Early Childhood. Shauna, how will that be helpful to parents as well as providers?
So, we are really excited about the new department. We believe that once programs that are all serving early childhood from the various different agencies right now will be able to provide a seamless system for families that's far less complex than what it is at the current moment. And so we've worked together, I think, as all early childhood providers in the state to figure out kind of what the challenges are to families accessing services. And it can be everything from a lack of knowledge. It can also be the fact that they live in a childcare desert, but often it's families don't realize what they're eligible for. And we feel like having everything within one state agency will allow the burden to be on the agency, as opposed to the burden of finding the quality care being on the parent, figuring out what they can apply for, what they're eligible for, et cetera.
Shauna, you mentioned, last month the Trump administration placed a freeze on federal funds that they say were not intended to impact programs like Head Start, like Medicare. But I think a lot of agencies report that it actually did. Michaela, as on the board of the Illinois Head Start Association, what do you know about what the impact actually was that day and what it's been?
So a lot of our programs were not able to pull from the system to even access funds. That brought barriers on not being able to pay bills, not being able to pay employees, and some centers had to close and send people home because they could not pay them. So with the system going up and down like it is a challenge. Every day they're feeling like, is it going to be different? We're not able to hire new employees because they're scared that they won't get paid.
And I'd like to get a sense a little bit, if we could, of how early education is funded, because it actually comes from several buckets between the state and the federal government. Shauna, give us a brief understanding of that, please.
Sure thing. So the Office of Head Start funds programs nationwide directly from the Office of Head Start to local communities. And that programming is based on need. That programming is offered free to families. It's for folks that are expecting a baby all the way through the age of 5 in most instances. And it really is a program that's two-generational, supporting that expectant family, that new family, all the way through that child getting into really the K through 12 system, with the goal of supporting them towards self-sufficiency. Then we have state programming that's funded primarily through the Illinois Department of Human Services. We get the Child Care Development Block Grant, which is a grant that comes from the federal government. A boatload of money comes into the Illinois Department of Human Services, and that funds our child care assistance program, which are also for families that are working, that are low income or in school. And that really was designed as a work support for families so that they too could attain self-sufficiency and be able to afford quality care for their children.
Thank you for that explanation. Well, I just wanted to, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to get Michaela back in here one more time, because you're also a former Head Start mom. How would you say that those services were beneficial to you and your family in about 20 seconds?
My children both are very ahead of their time in their grade level. They're super smart, and I was able to receive services that I would not have been able to receive anywhere else.
Okay. That's where we'll have to leave it. Thanks to you both for joining us. Best of luck to you, Shauna Ejay and Michaela Collins. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, remembering a founding mother in the field of early education and mother to another well-known Chicagoan. Now, a tribute to a pioneering Chicagoan who died late last year. Not only is she the mother of another familiar Chicagoan, Valerie Jarrett, but Barbara Taylor Bowman also descended from history makers, like her grandfather, who was the first African-American to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So it's no wonder she, too, would forge her own path in a different direction, creating and nurturing the field of early education. Here's a look at the life of Barbara Taylor Bowman.
This is my parents' wedding album. They were married in 1950 here in Chicago.
The Bowman Wedding Album, just one volume of a family history that spans generations.
As you can tell, it has withstood the test of time. This is my grandfather, Robert Taylor, after whom the Robert Taylor Homes was named.
Taylor's daughter, Barbara Taylor Bowman, is among those history makers, as is her own daughter, Valerie Jarrett.
My mother had an extraordinary life, and she has been my role model since I was born. She managed to do the mighty juggle, as I call it, being extraordinary in the field of early childhood education, but also making time for her first priority, which was her family.
Born in 1928, Barbara Taylor grew up under the unwritten laws of Jim Crow. She graduated from Sarah Lawrence College in 1950 and the University of Chicago in 1952 with a master's in education. She married Jarrett's father, Dr. James Bowman, who'd later become the first black tenured physician at the University of Chicago. In the beginning, though, he struggled to find work as a doctor in the U.S., so the young couple moved to Iran.
How crazy was that for them to move to Iran in the mid-50s? They didn't know the language. They'd never been further than one trip to Europe. They didn't know anything about the culture. But Iran was offering my father an opportunity that was not available to him here in the United States. And they both had this kind of curious spirit and adventuresome spirit, and he said, let's go, and she said, absolutely.
Later, after their daughter was born, the couple would return to the States, and Barbara Bowman would pursue her passion.
She loves young children. There isn't a young child that comes within 20 feet of my mom who isn't going to have that child grabbed and put in her lap and hold her close. She just marveled at them.
With her experience as a preschool teacher, she was inspired to co-found the Erikson Institute in 1966, along with 3 others, psychologist Maria Piers, social worker Lorraine Wallach, and businessman Irving Harris. The group recognized that most preschool teachers weren't prepared to meet the needs of children from under-resourced communities.
And this institution was founded with the idea of making sure that the most disinvested communities, children and families, had high-quality teachers who understood child development. How children develop socio-emotionally, how children develop cognitively, how children develop in terms of language.
Bowman remained a teacher and mentor at Erikson until the end.
Barbara was always very hopeful, but also very action-oriented. She had very high expectations for herself and very high expectations for everyone else. One of the things that I appreciated about her is that she praised publicly and critiqued privately.
Soto Manning describes Bowman as a fierce advocate for what she believed in.
I remember Valerie talking about how there was an event at their home and President Barack Obama was going to be there, and how she begged Barbara not to ask him for early childhood funding. And she opens the study door, and she was there with President Barack Obama insisting on more funding for early childhood education. So that's what I mean, that she was relentless.
Some of that influence landed with Governor J.B. Pritzker, who started the state's first Department of Early Education in 2024.
Is a personal hero of mine, and that's the great Barbara Bowman. As you know, she is one of the co-founders of Erikson and a giant in the field of early childhood education. And you have no doubt spent the past few years of your life poring over some of her work and soaking in an infinite number of lessons that she has left us.
And those lessons were sought after until the day she died.
My mom was 96 when she died. The morning that she died, a colleague from Erikson came over to get advice. And I remember standing in the kitchen, listening to my mother go through like point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5 of what the colleague should do. And she died a few hours later.
For as much as Bowman was the guiding light for Erikson, she also was for her family.
My mom became the matriarch of this family, and we came together because she called us together.
And certainly for her daughter Valerie.
And she certainly lived this by example. The question isn't, do you have it all in the first chapter? The question is, do the chapters of the book that are your life add up to a whole when you look back? And, did you love? Did people love you? Did you make real strong relationships? Did you follow your passion? Did you make an impact? She often tells you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. And I will miss that, but I'm hoping that that voice just stays in my head, because by now I know what she would think is the right thing to do, and so I'll just let that be my true north.
An impactful life she did have. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.